On the day of my daughter's wedding, I should have been smiling with pride as I walked her down the aisle. Instead, I was blindsided. Just as Emily began her vows, her new in-laws stood up and cut across the silence. He is not family. He does not belong here. My blood ran cold as every head turned toward me. My daughter's hands trembled, her eyes wide with panic. They thought they had shamed me in front of everyone. But what they didn't know was that I had been waiting for this moment. And I came prepared with the truth that would ruin them. Before we continue, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do if your daughter's in-laws tried to humiliate you at her own wedding? I never thought I would be a single father. But life has a cruel way of forcing you into roles you never expected. When my wife, Karen, passed away from cancer, I was left staring at an empty side of the bed, a quiet kitchen, and a daughter who still needed a parent strong enough to keep her world together. Emily was only 13, fragile but stubborn, with her mother's eyes and my temper. I promised myself then that I would never let her feel abandoned, not after losing her mother. So I threw myself into both roles. I was the one who packed her lunches, who braided her hair badly before school, who clapped too loudly at her concerts, who stayed up late checking her homework even though I had to be at the construction site by dawn. Money was always tight. There were weeks when I skipped meals just to make sure she had the shoes she wanted for basketball or the supplies she needed for a school project. When she turned 16 and asked for braces, I sold Karen's old car to pay for them. I could have kept it as a reminder of the life we once had. But Emily's smile was more important. Later, when college came around, I refinanced the house so she would not graduate with debt strapped around her neck. Every extra shift, every aching muscle, every late night, it was all for her. My own dreams became less than an afterthought. The only thing that mattered was that my little girl would one day have a life that was not defined by sacrifice. When Emily told me she was engaged, I cried, though I tried to hide it. Daniel Miller seemed like a kind man. He was steady, polite, and clearly adored my daughter. But when I met his parents, I felt a knot form in my chest. The Millers were not like us. They had money, and they did not just own it. They displayed it like a trophy for the world to admire. Their house looked like something out of a glossy magazine, with marble floors and furniture you were scared to sit on. Mr. Miller's handshake was firm but distant, his smile thin and practiced, the kind that never touched his eyes. Mrs. Miller greeted me with politeness, but her gaze flicked over my jacket, my shoes, and even the calluses on my hands, as if she was evaluating a piece of furniture that did not quite belong in her home. I told myself that I did not care. Emily loved Daniel, and if his parents came with the package, then I would swallow my pride for her. But the longer I spent around them, the more I realized that they did not simply tolerate me. They looked down on me. It was not always obvious. It came in small, cutting remarks hidden inside friendly smiles. Mrs. Miller once told me, "Emily has always had potential. It is wonderful she is marrying into a family that can elevate her life." She said it over dinner, sipping her wine as though she had not just dismissed everything I had done for my daughter in one casual sentence. I smiled politely, but inside my jaw was grinding. The wedding planning only confirmed what I feared. The Millers offered to pay for the venue, and at first it seemed generous. But once they had control of that, they pushed further, insisting on controlling the guest list, the decorations, even the music. Slowly, people I loved began to vanish from the seating chart. My brothers, cousins, neighbors who had helped me through Karen's illness, all of them replaced by Mr. Miller's business partners and Mrs. Miller's charity acquaintances. When I confronted her about it, She tilted her head with that rehearsed kindness and said, "It is only space, Dennis. We have to make room for the right people." The right people. Apparently, my family did not qualify. I gritted my teeth and stayed quiet, because Emily was caught in the middle. She wanted me happy, but she also wanted peace with her in-laws. I could see the strain in her eyes every time a decision became another tug of war between me and them. So I tried to step back. I paid for Emily's dress, the catering deposit, and the flowers. I kept my receipts, though I never waved them in anyone's face. To me, it was simply part of my role as her father. But to the Millers, it was as though none of it existed. They told anyone who would listen that they were covering everything, that this wedding was their family's gift to Emily. I sat in silence while they took credit for sacrifices they never made. It hurt. But nothing hurt more than the night Mrs. Miller suggested to Emily that maybe I should not walk her down the aisle. She said it so casually, like it was a small change, as though tradition could be rewritten for convenience. "It is not about excluding him," she told Emily. "It is about reflecting the people who are really building the future. Daniel's father has provided everything, and it would look odd if Dennis overshadowed that moment." Emily stood her ground that time. She told her bluntly that I was her father, and I would be the one to walk her down the aisle no matter what. Later that night, she came to me, her face pale, and swore that no one could take that moment away from me. I hugged her and told her it was fine. But inside I felt something snap. The Millers were not simply trying to make themselves the center of attention. They wanted to erase me entirely. The rehearsal dinner cemented that truth. I sat at the end of the long table while the Millers gave speeches about their sacrifices, their pride, their investment in this union. Every sentence made it sound as if Daniel was marrying above his station, as if Emily had been rescued from a life that was somehow lacking. Not once did my name pass their lips. I was a ghost at my own daughter's rehearsal, watching while people who barely knew her claimed ownership of her story. I forced myself to raise my glass and smile at the right moments, but my heart was pounding in my chest. Near the end of the night, I excused myself and walked into the hallway to catch my breath. That was when I heard them. Their voices were low, but the house was quiet enough that every word carried. Mrs. Miller's tone was sharp, edged with a satisfaction she did not bother to hide. "Tomorrow, during the vows, everyone will see what kind of man he really is. Nothing." I froze in place, my back pressed against the wall, my fists clenched at my sides. I felt my face flush hot, my chest tight. For a moment I considered stepping into the room and confronting them, demanding they repeat those words to my face. But I stopped myself. If I lost my temper there, it would only give them the satisfaction of proving their point. They wanted me to look small, angry, unworthy. Instead, I stood still, my ears burning with every syllable. They were not content with sidelining me in the planning. They were not satisfied with moving my family to the back row or cutting my name out of the program. They wanted to humiliate me openly, to strip me of my dignity in front of every guest, and worst of all, to do it while my daughter watched. In that moment, my humiliation hardened into something else entirely. They thought they were preparing a stage for my downfall. But I knew what they did not. I had been keeping records. I had been listening. And if they wanted a scene during the vows, I was ready to give them one they would never forget. The morning of the wedding arrived far earlier than I expected. Sleep had been nothing more than a cruel joke, slipping through my fingers no matter how tightly I shut my eyes. My mind replayed Mrs. Miller's words over and over, like a broken record, each repetition fueling the quiet storm inside me. I got up before sunrise, made coffee that tasted like ash, and stared out the kitchen window at the dim light pushing against the horizon. Today was supposed to be a day of joy, of pride, of watching my little girl step into her future. Instead, I knew it was going to be a battleground. I ironed my suit slowly, pressing each crease as though it might give me control over the chaos waiting ahead. It was not an expensive suit, just one I had saved for special occasions. I thought about the hours of overtime I had worked to buy it years ago, back when I first imagined giving Emily away. Now I wondered if I would even be allowed to stand beside her, without the Millers turning it into another insult. When I arrived at the venue, the first thing I noticed was that my seat had been moved. Originally, Emily and I had agreed that I would sit at the front row after walking her down the aisle. Now, my name card had been placed 3 rows back, tucked neatly between distant cousins of Daniel's and people I had never met in my life. I stared at it for a long time, the letters of my name printed in elegant script, mocking me like a label on clearance merchandise shoved to the back of a shelf. "Excuse me," I said to one of the ushers. "There must be a mistake. I am the bride's father." He gave me an apologetic shrug. "The seating chart came from Mrs. Miller. She said you would be more comfortable here." More comfortable. My jaw tightened, but I swallowed the anger building in my chest. Losing my temper now would only give them ammunition. Instead, I placed the card back on the seat and walked away. Let them think I was swallowing humiliation again. They had no idea what was waiting for them. As I wandered through the hall, I noticed more small adjustments. The photographs Emily and I had chosen together for the slideshow, pictures of her childhood, family vacations, even a few of Karen, were missing, replaced instead by a montage of Daniel's family achievements, business awards, charity galas, luxury vacations. My daughter had been reduced to a supporting character in her own wedding. I clenched my fists in my pockets and forced myself to breathe. Emily had fought me when I tried to contribute too much to the wedding. She insisted the Millers were only trying to help. She did not want me stressing over every dollar. I agreed to let them take the lead, thinking it would ease her burden. But I saw now what they had really been doing. This was not about helping. This was about rewriting the story so I barely existed in it. The program booklet was another blow. When I picked one up, flipping through its glossy pages, I realized my name was not mentioned anywhere. Not as the father of the bride, not as the man walking her down the aisle, not even in the thank you section. The Millers had erased me completely, as though Emily had been delivered to the altar by their generosity alone. I sat down in a quiet corner, staring at the booklet in my hands. My chest ached, but my anger burned hotter than the hurt. They could try to erase me on paper, but the truth could not be erased so easily. Not when I had kept every receipt, every bank slip, every detail of how much I had poured into this wedding. Around mid-morning, I spotted Mr. Miller walking briskly toward the priest with an envelope tucked under his arm. They spoke in hushed tones near the altar, Mr. Miller gesturing animatedly, his face tight with determination. The priest looked uncomfortable, glancing around as though afraid someone might overhear. I stayed back, watching carefully, my instincts telling me this was the moment I had been waiting for. Whatever was inside that envelope, it was part of their plan. Later, I caught sight of Emily in her dressing room. She was radiant, her hair done up with delicate pearls woven through, her dress falling perfectly around her. For a moment, my anger faded, replaced by a rush of pride and love. She saw me in the mirror and smiled, her eyes glistening. "Dad," she whispered, turning to hug me. "You look perfect." I hugged her tightly, trying not to let her see the storm inside me. She had no idea what her in-laws were plotting. She thought today was only about love and family. I wanted to protect her from the truth, but I knew soon enough she would see it with her own eyes. As the ceremony began, the guests filled the hall with murmurs of excitement. I took my place at the aisle, determined not to let the Millers steal this moment from me. Emily looped her arm through mine, her hand trembling slightly. "You ready, Dad?" she whispered. "Always," I said, my voice steady. We walked together, step by step, toward the altar. The music swelled, the guests rose, and for one brief moment, I felt like the proudest father alive. But as we reached the front, I noticed Mrs. Miller lean toward her husband, her lips curling into a smile that was anything but kind. Daniel looked nervous, glancing back at his parents as though silently begging them not to do whatever they were planning. The priest began the ceremony, his voice calm, asking for the vows to begin. Emily held her paper in shaking hands, looking into Daniel's eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, chairs scraped loudly against the floor. Mr. and Mrs. Miller stood up in unison, their faces hard with self-righteous determination. Gasps rippled through the room as they raised their voices over the ceremony. "He is not family," Mr. Miller said, pointing directly at me. "He does not belong here." The words echoed through the church like a slap. Emily froze mid-sentence, her face drained of color. Guests shifted uncomfortably, whispering behind their hands. My daughter's vows hung unfinished in the air, replaced by the crushing weight of humiliation they had planned for me. The priest faltered, looking from them to me, unsure how to proceed. The silence grew heavy, pressing down on my chest like a vice. Every eye in the room was on me, waiting to see if I would crumble under the public shaming. My daughter's hand trembled in mine, her grip desperate as though she feared I might walk out. I did not move. I did not speak. I stared back at the Millers, their smug faces shining with victory, and I felt the fury rise inside me. They thought they had broken me. They had no idea what was coming next. The silence that followed Mr. Miller's words felt longer than any silence I had endured in my life. My daughter's vows lay half-spoken on her lips, cut off like a song silenced mid-note. The room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing closer as every eye turned to me. I could feel the weight of 100 stares, the whispers, the pity, and perhaps even a few smirks from those who were too quick to believe the Miller's version of the truth. I did not look away. My gaze stayed locked on them, father and mother standing there with self-satisfaction painted across their faces. Mrs. Miller tilted her chin as though she were a queen delivering judgment, while Mr. Miller's hand rested on the back of his son's chair, as if claiming the very ground beneath his feet. Daniel looked torn, his eyes darting between his parents and me, his lips pressed into a tight line. I almost pitied him, caught between loyalty to blood and loyalty to the woman he loved. Emily's grip on my hand tightened, her nails digging into my skin. She whispered, trembling, "Dad, please just ignore them. Please." Her eyes begged me to let it pass, to pretend it had not happened. But I could see the shame burning in her cheeks, the way she wanted to disappear from her own wedding. I could not let her carry that weight. This was my humiliation, not hers. The priest cleared his throat awkwardly, looking at the Millers, then at me. "Perhaps we should..." His voice faltered. No one knew how to proceed. No one knew if the wedding should go on, if the vows should continue, or if the day was already ruined beyond repair. In that moment, I felt a flood of memories wash over me. I saw myself in the hospital waiting room the night Karen slipped away, gripping Emily's hand as she cried for her mother. I saw the mornings I had woken up at 4 just to cook breakfast and still make it to work on time. I saw the long nights when I stitched the hem of her prom dress because she could not afford alterations. The weekends I skipped meals to pay for her college textbooks. The nights I stayed up until dawn, fixing the pipes in the house so she could take a warm shower before school. Every sacrifice I had made for her life stood in direct contrast to the Millers' smug dismissal. They had not been there when she needed braces. They had not been there when her heart broke after her first boyfriend cheated. They had not been there when she graduated high school and turned, tears in her eyes, to look at the empty seat where her mother should have been. They had not been there when I whispered in her ear that her mother would be proud of her. And yet, here they were, daring to say I did not belong. The shame was sharp, but the anger underneath it burned hotter than any flame I had ever felt. My instinct was to shout, to call them liars, to grab them by the shoulders and force them to face the truth of who I was. But another voice rose above the fury, quieter but stronger, the echo of my late wife. I remembered the night before she passed, when her voice had been soft but steady. She told me, "Dennis, never let anyone make you small. Not in front of Emily. Not ever." That voice steadied me now. I straightened my back, loosened my clenched jaw, and let the silence stretch even longer. I would not crumble. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. Emily's eyes filled with tears, her lip trembling. Daniel finally stood, trying to calm his parents, but they brushed him off as though he were a child. Mr. Miller turned back to the crowd and said loudly, "This man has contributed nothing. He wants to bask in our generosity, but he has never earned his place here. He has always been beneath this family." Gasps rippled through the audience again. My chest ached with rage, but I forced myself to remain still. The whispers grew louder. Some guests shook their heads in disgust. Others leaned forward as though watching a play unfold on stage. My humiliation was their entertainment, and the Millers knew it. I looked at Emily. She was crumbling before my eyes, her day collapsing under the weight of her in-laws' cruelty. And that was the moment I made a silent vow of my own. If they wanted to strip me of dignity in front of everyone, I would not only reclaim it, I would take theirs with me. The ceremony stalled, the priest lowering his head as though wishing himself invisible. Emily whispered again, "Dad, please." I squeezed her hand once, a silent promise that I had it under control. I turned my gaze back to the Millers and studied their faces. Smug, confident, certain they had cornered me. But they had made a mistake. They thought this was the end of me. They thought the whispers and gasps would bury me in shame. What they did not know was that I had come prepared. For weeks, I had suspected they were planning something. The way they maneuvered with the guest list, the way my name had disappeared from the program, the way they tried to strip me of every role in my daughter's wedding. All of it pointed to one goal. They wanted me erased. That was why I had kept every receipt, every document, every scrap of proof that showed how much I had poured into this day. And more than that, I had uncovered truths about them they would never want the world to hear. I thought of the envelope Mr. Miller had handed to the priest earlier, the whispered conversation they thought no one had seen. I had no idea what words lay inside, but I knew the pattern. They wanted control, They wanted humiliation, and I would use their own arrogance against them. The tension in the room was unbearable. Emily was on the verge of breaking, Daniel frozen in conflict, the priest shifting uncomfortably. And still, the Millers stood tall, certain they had delivered the final blow. I inhaled slowly, my decision made. My humiliation would end here. I stepped forward, loosening my daughter's trembling grip. Every eye followed me as I faced the Millers directly. The room went quiet again, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. I reached into the inside pocket of my suit, where I had tucked a folder that had never left my side since yesterday. My hand brushed the papers within, and the weight of them steadied me. For the first time that day, a small smile touched my lips. The Millers had wanted a scene during the vows. They were about to get one. I did not rush. I took my time, each step deliberate as I moved toward the priest. The Millers watched me with amusement, convinced they had won, certain that whatever words I spoke would only confirm their victory. The whispers swelled as I passed the front rows, my name absent from the programs, but very much alive in every tongue that now murmured, "What is he going to do?" The priest shifted uncomfortably as I reached him, his eyes darting between me and the Millers. He looked like a man standing in the middle of a collapsing bridge, unsure which way to run. I placed a steady hand on his arm. "May I?" I asked. My voice was calm, not a tremor in it. He hesitated, then gave a small nod, relief flickering in his eyes that perhaps I would restore some order. He handed me the microphone. The sound of it leaving his hand was like a bell tolling for the Millers, though they did not know it yet. I turned to face the crowd. My daughter's eyes were wet, her hands trembling as she clutched her vows. Daniel looked pale, his lips parted, but no words coming. And the Millers. They stood tall, smug, waiting to see me stumble. I let the silence stretch for a heartbeat longer. Then I spoke. "I was not planning to speak today," I began, my voice carrying across the hall, steady and controlled. "But since I have been invited so loudly into this moment, perhaps it is time I do." A ripple went through the crowd, the kind of shift you feel when the air itself changes. The Millers' smirks wavered ever so slightly. "I have been told that I do not belong here," I continued, my eyes locking on Mr. Miller's. "That I am not family. That I am nothing." My voice grew sharper on the last word, and the guests stirred, glancing between us. I paused, letting the insult hang there, letting it echo in every ear before I went on. "I will not shout. I will not insult. I will only tell you the truth. And since the Millers wish to make a spectacle of me, let us give them the spectacle they asked for." I reached into my jacket and pulled out the folder. The snap of the clasp echoed in the silence. Papers, neatly stacked, filled the priest's lectern as I set them down. The crowd leaned forward, craning their necks to see. "This wedding," I said, spreading the first page out, "was not built by the generosity of one family. It was built by sacrifice, by my sacrifice. You see, I may not have marble floors or a glass house, but every flower in this room, every thread in my daughter's dress, every plate of food waiting in that kitchen, half of it was paid for by these hands." I held them up, calloused and scarred, the proof of decades of work. Gasps broke through the crowd. The Millers stiffened. I could see Mrs. Miller's lips press into a hard line, her hand gripping her husband's arm. I held up receipts, one after the other, my voice never faltering. "Here is the deposit for the dress. Here is the payment for the caterer. Here is the florist's bill, and here—" I paused, letting the moment sink in as I pulled the last slip free, is the down payment on this very hall. The whispers became louder now, a wave of shock rolling through the guests. Some turned to stare at the Millers, who had been bragging for months about covering every expense. Their faces flushed red, their posture less certain. I have been silent while credit was stolen. I have been patient while my family was pushed to the back row. I have endured being erased from the program and dismissed from the planning. I took a step closer to the Millers, lowering my voice but making sure it carried. But I will not be erased from my daughter's vows. Emily's tears spilled over, her shoulders shaking as she covered her mouth. Daniel stared at his parents with wide eyes, as though seeing them clearly for the first time. The Millers tried to recover. Mr. Miller barked out, "This is pathetic," waving around receipts like a beggar. "You think this makes you important? You are still nothing." His voice cracked with strain, and I saw the first beads of sweat at his temple. I did not flinch. I smiled. It was small, but it cut through his bravado. "Nothing," I said softly. "Nothing is what you will have left once the truth is known." I turned back to the crowd. "What you have not been told," I said, placing my hand on the folder again, "is that this is not the only truth I carry. The Millers have worked hard to erase me, but in the process, they have left behind secrets of their own." A murmur rose, louder this time, the guests leaning forward like an audience waiting for the curtain to rise on the second act. The Millers' faces tightened, a shadow of fear flickering behind their eyes. I raised the folder slightly, letting it hover in my hands. "There are things about this family that you deserve to know. Things about how this wedding was really funded. Things about debts and deals made behind closed doors." The air grew heavy. Even the priest, who had been wringing his hands nervously, now looked frozen, his eyes locked on the folder. Emily reached toward me, her voice breaking. "Dad, what do you mean?" I looked at her gently. "I mean, sweetheart, that you deserve the truth on your wedding day. Not lies, not arrogance. The truth I let the silence hold for a moment longer, the tension stretching until it was nearly unbearable. Then I looked directly at the Millers and said, 'And the truth begins with your debts.'" Gasps erupted, chairs scraped as people leaned forward. Mr. Miller's face drained of color. Mrs. Miller's composure cracked, her hand clutching at her pearls. Daniel turned pale, confusion and dread flooding his face. I placed the folder back on the lectern, my hand resting firmly on top of it. "You wanted a scene during the vows. Very well. Let us give the people what they came for." The room was silent. So silent I could hear the faint creak of the old floorboards beneath my shoes as I shifted my stance. The Millers stood rigid, their faces drained of color, but their eyes still sharp with arrogance. They thought I was bluffing, that I would wave around a few receipts and then slink back to my seat. They had no idea how deep this went. I opened the folder and pulled out the first set of documents, my voice calm but carrying across the hall. "For months, the Millers have told everyone they paid for this wedding. They told their friends, their business partners, even the guests in this room that this day was their gift to my daughter and their son. But the truth is right here in black and white. This invoice for the florist, paid by me. This receipt for the catering deposit, paid by me. This bill for the dress, paid by me. Even the down payment on this very hall, my name, my signature, my money." The gasps from the crowd were louder now. People craned their necks, some rising from their seats to see the papers in my hands. Whispers rippled from row to row, guests looking at one another in shock. The Millers had spent months parading themselves as the benefactors, but the truth was tearing their illusion apart in seconds. I turned toward them, my voice steady. You wanted me to be invisible. You wanted to erase my name from the program, from the guest list, even from the role of father of the bride. But the fact remains. Without me, there would be no wedding. Emily let out a sob, her hand trembling against Daniel's arm. Why would you lie about this? She demanded, her voice cracking as she turned to his parents. Why would you tell everyone you paid when you knew my dad did so much? Mrs. Miller's lips tightened into a hard line. Emily, please, she said quickly, her voice shrill under the weight of so many eyes. This man is making a spectacle. Do not let him ruin your day. He has always been dramatic. Her words cut me like knives, but they only fueled me further. I reached into the folder again and held up a second sheet. Dramatic? Here is the wire transfer receipt from my bank account for the catering service. Here is the florist's invoice, stamped paid in full by me. Here is the deposit for the hall, withdrawn from my savings account. Dramatic is your word for truth, because truth burns away lies. The whispers grew louder, shock rippling through the guests like a rising tide. Some of Daniel's friends turned to look at him, pity in their eyes. Others stared openly at the Millers, waiting for them to explain. Mr. Miller's face reddened, his composure cracking as he stepped forward. You think receipts make you important? You think a few scraps of paper change what you are? You will never be more than a laborer with dirt under his nails. You have no place in this family. His voice thundered across the hall, but beneath the fury was a note of desperation. I lifted my hand slowly, cutting through his words with calm precision. If I am nothing, then why are you so afraid of what I hold in my hands? A hush fell again. Every guest leaned in, every whisper died. I nodded to the back of the room, where my nephew, acting as best man, stood by the audio system. He gave me a small nod in return. Within seconds, the speakers crackled, and a recording filled the hall. It was Mr. Miller's voice, clear and unmistakable. He is an embarrassment. Let him sit in the back row like the beggar he is. Tomorrow we will show everyone who really matters. The recording ended with laughter, Mrs. Miller's voice joining his. Yes, let him see what nothing looks like. The reaction was instant. Gasps, angry murmurs, heads turning toward the Millers. Emily covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. Daniel's face went white as he looked at his parents in disbelief. The guests were no longer confused. They had heard the truth with their own ears. Mrs. Miller tried to shout above the noise. That recording is fake. He has manipulated it. Do not listen. But her voice was drowned by the outrage spreading through the crowd. One guest shouted, "Shameful!" Another muttered loudly, "Disgusting." The tide was turning, and they could feel it. I stepped forward again, my voice cutting through the chaos. Fake? Then explain why your words match the actions you have taken. Explain why my name is erased from the program. Explain why my family sits 3 rows back while yours fills the front. Explain why you told the priest to prepare a speech that was not mine. All eyes turned back to them, their faces twisted, caught between fury and fear. I set the folder back down, my hand resting firmly on top of it. This is only the beginning. These papers, these receipts, this recording, they are the surface of what you tried to hide. You mocked me in front of my daughter, in front of every guest here. But what you never expected is that I have the truth of who you are. And I am not done. Emily turned to Daniel, her voice breaking. Is this true? Did they really say all of this? Daniel's face was pale, his hands shaking. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His silence spoke louder than anything else. Mr. Miller slammed his fist against the back of a chair. Enough! This man is trying to destroy us. Do not believe him. His voice cracked, and I saw the flicker of panic behind his eyes. I looked at the guests, then back at the Millers. My voice was low, but carried through the hall like thunder. Destroy you? Number, I am only telling the truth. And the truth is that you are drowning in debt, desperate to maintain the illusion of wealth. And you thought using my daughter's wedding as your stage would save you. But now the curtain is falling. Gasps erupted again, louder this time, disbelief mixing with outrage. Some guests turned to each other, whispering furiously. Daniel's face turned ashen, his jaw slack as he processed what I had just said. Mrs. Miller clutched her husband's arm, her face pale as paper. "Stop," she hissed. "Do not say another word." I lifted another envelope from the folder, holding it high enough for everyone to see. This contains the proof of everything. The loans you begged for, the refinancing of your house, the bank statements showing just how hollow your wealth really is. You mocked me during my daughter's vows, but I will show everyone exactly what you have been hiding. The room erupted with noise. Gasps, whispers, the scrape of chairs as people leaned forward, desperate to hear more. The Millers froze, caught like deer in headlights, their perfect image shattering piece by piece. I turned back to the crowd, my voice calm but deadly certain. You wanted me invisible. You wanted me nothing. But today I will show you what nothing looks like when it is stripped of lies. The room buzzed with whispers, shock waves spreading like ripples in a pond. People were no longer looking at me with pity or confusion. Their eyes had turned toward the Millers, sharp, accusing, hungry for answers. The perfect couple who had spent years cultivating an image of untouchable wealth now stood cornered, their carefully painted smiles slipping. I opened the envelope and pulled out the first sheet. My voice was calm, deliberate, like a man reading scripture. 3 months ago, the Millers refinanced their house for the second time in 5 years. Here is the document, signed and stamped by the bank. I held the page up high enough for the front rows to see, then laid it down on the lectern. 2 weeks after that, they applied for a personal loan of $100,000. Denied. 2 weeks later, another loan request, this time $50,000, also denied. Gasps rippled through the guests. A woman in the second row, one of Mrs. Miller's charity friends, covered her mouth with her hand. The whispers grew louder, sharper. I pulled out another sheet. This is their credit card balance, over $70,000 owed. Here is the proof of their late mortgage payment last month. And here, I let the moment breathe, watching their faces pale, is the document showing the lien placed on their property by the IRS. The room erupted. Chairs scraped. Voices rose in disbelief. Some guests leaned toward each other, speaking in frantic whispers. Others stared openly at the Millers, their expressions shifting from admiration to disgust. Mr. Miller's face turned beet red, his fists clenched at his sides. "Lies," he shouted, his voice breaking. "All of it lies. He has fabricated every word." I met his fury with calm. "Then explain why the signatures match yours. Explain why your bank stamped these. Explain why these debts appear under your name and not mine. Explain, if you can, how I could possibly invent the numbers that even your son has never seen." Daniel stiffened, his eyes wide, his face pale. "Dad," he whispered hoarsely, his voice shaking. Is this true?" Mr. Miller opened his mouth, but no words came. His jaw worked, but silence poured out instead. His silence was louder than any denial. Mrs. Miller tried to salvage the wreckage. She stepped forward, her voice trembling but still clinging to superiority. "This man is twisting things. We are not in ruin. These are investments, temporary matters. Everyone here knows debt is a tool for growth." Her words fell flat. The crowd no longer looked convinced. They looked betrayed. I placed the final set of documents on the lectern and let my voice cut through the noise. Debt is not a tool when you cannot pay it back. Debt is not growth when you are drowning. And debt is not success when you use it to throw a wedding you cannot afford, just to trick people into believing you are still what you once were. Emily's sobs grew louder, her shoulders shaking as Daniel wrapped an arm around her. His own face was ashen, his world collapsing alongside his parents'. He whispered to her, but his eyes were locked on the documents, as though seeing his family clearly for the first time. I let the silence stretch again before I spoke. They mocked me during my daughter's vows, told me I was not family, told me I did not belong. But while they stood there in arrogance, they knew their empire was built on sand. They used my daughter's wedding as a stage to parade wealth they did not have. They erased my name to cover their shame. And now, everyone here knows the truth. The guests erupted again, this time with anger. Some shook their heads, others whispered words like frauds and liars. The sound swelled into a wave that pressed the Millers backward, their once proud posture shrinking under the weight of public exposure. Mr. Miller tried one last time, his voice cracking as he raised it above the noise. "This is slander. You will regret this." I stepped forward, my voice low but cutting through the hall like a blade. "No. What I regret is that my daughter had to stand here on her wedding day and watch her in-laws humiliate her father. What I regret is that she now sees the truth in front of her. Not in whispers or suspicion, but in documents and voices that cannot be denied." I turned to Daniel, locking eyes with him. "The question now is not whether they lied. The question is whether you are willing to bind yourself to those lies. Do you still want to make vows under the shadow of this deception?" The room fell silent again, all eyes on Daniel. His face was ghostly, his hands trembling as he held Emily's. He opened his mouth, his lips moving, but no words came out. Emily's tears fell freely, her face buried against his shoulder. But even in her despair, she looked at him, desperate for his answer. The Millers stiffened, panic spreading across their faces. Mrs. Miller hissed through her teeth, "Do not you dare betray us, Daniel." Mr. Miller's jaw tightened, his eyes burning with desperation. The priest lowered his book, his face solemn. "I cannot continue this ceremony under such shadows, not until truth is restored." Gasps spread again. Guests turned, muttering furiously. Some shook their heads, others began standing, restless, uncertain whether the wedding would collapse entirely. Mr. Miller lunged forward, his voice rising to a shout. "This farce ends now. You think you can stand here and destroy us? You are nothing, Dennis. Nothing." His finger jabbed at me, his face twisted in rage, veins standing out on his neck. I stood firm, meeting his fury with quiet steel. "If I am nothing, then why are you sweating? Why are you shouting? Why do you look like a man watching his empire crumble?" The room hushed again. For the first time that day, the Miller's silence did not come from arrogance. It came from fear. I placed a hand back on the folder, tapping it once for emphasis. "What you have seen is only the surface, the debts, the loans, the lies. But there is more, Daniel. Much more. Things you have never been told. Things you deserve to know before you speak a single vow. Daniel swallowed hard, his voice barely audible. What things? I let my eyes settle on him, then on the crowd, then back to the Millers. My next words were measured, sharp as a blade. Their debts do not just touch them. They touch you, Daniel. And unless you hear the truth now, you will inherit not only their shame, but their ruin. Daniel's face drained of color, his lips moving but no sound coming out. He stared at me like a man who had just learned the ground beneath his feet was quicksand. Emily clutched his arm, her eyes wide and wet, silently begging him to speak, to take her side, to give her reassurance that the day could still be salvaged. But Daniel's silence told its own story. He was afraid. The guests leaned forward in their seats, hungry for the next words. The tension in the room was a living thing now, pressing against every wall, holding every breath captive. Even the priest had lowered his book completely, his head bowed as though waiting for a judgment he could not prevent. I pulled a final envelope from the folder, heavier than the rest, the paper thick with documents inside. I held it up slowly, letting every eye follow it. Daniel, I said, my voice calm. There is something you need to know. Something your parents have never told you. Something they have hidden even from you, their son. Mr. Miller stepped forward sharply, his voice hoarse with panic. Enough. Do not listen to this man. He is trying to poison you against us. He is bitter. He is jealous. He is... Quiet. My voice sliced across his like a blade. The word echoed in the hall, and to my surprise, he stopped. The crowd had turned on him completely now. Their eyes were not on me anymore. They were on him, on Mrs. Miller, on the image of wealth and strength that was crumbling before them like wet paper. I opened the envelope and pulled out the first page. Years ago, Daniel, when you were still in college, your parents created a trust for you. Money set aside for your future. Funds meant to secure your education and your stability. I held up the page, the signatures clear at the bottom. That trust was real. It was generous, and it was meant for you. Daniel blinked, confusion clouding his face. I remember, he said softly. I knew about it, but they told me it was locked until later, until I was older. I laid the paper down and pulled out the next. It was not locked. It was drained, piece by piece, year by year, until nothing remained. I slapped the page against the lectern. They used it to cover their debts. They used it to refinance their lies. They stole from their own son to keep the illusion of wealth alive. The gasps this time were deafening. A woman near the front row cried out, "Oh my God." Guests erupted in whispers and shouts, disbelief flooding the hall like a rising tide. Daniel staggered backward, his face pale as chalk. Emily clung to him, her tears falling freely, her eyes darting between me and his parents. "Tell me it is not true," Daniel demanded, his voice cracking. "Tell me he is lying." Mrs. Miller reached for him, her hands trembling. "Daniel, sweetheart, listen to me. We only did what was necessary. We did it for the family. We did it to protect our name, to protect... You did it for yourselves." Daniel's voice broke, fury trembling through it. "You used me. You used my future. And you let me believe it was all safe while you spent it to look rich." His chest heaved, his voice loud enough to shake the air. "You lied to me my whole life." The Millers' perfect masks finally cracked. Mr. Miller's shoulders sagged, his jaw clenched, his eyes darting like a trapped animal searching for an exit. Mrs. Miller's face crumpled, her painted smile gone. leaving only the raw panic of a woman watching her empire collapse. The guests were no longer whispering. They were angry. Voices rose around the hall, harsh words filling the air. Frauds. Shameless. How could they? The tide had turned completely, and the Millers were drowning in it. Emily looked at me through her tears, her voice trembling. Dad, you knew? You knew all this? I nodded slowly. I suspected for months. When they tried to erase me from this wedding, I knew something bigger was hiding underneath. So I looked, and what I found was worse than I imagined. She pressed her face into Daniel's shoulder, sobbing. He held her, but his own body shook with the weight of betrayal. The boy who had once looked at his parents with admiration now stared at them as though they were strangers. The priest cleared his throat, his voice steady but heavy. I cannot, in good conscience, continue this ceremony. Not while such deception clouds it. Marriage is built on truth, and there is no truth here today. The words landed like a gavel striking the bench. The ceremony was over. The Millers had not only lost their pride, they had lost control of the very day they tried to dominate. Mr. Miller's face twisted with rage. You think you have destroyed us? He snarled at me. This is temporary. We will recover. You are still nothing, Dennis. Nothing. His voice cracked, his body trembling, his arrogance bleeding into desperation. I stepped closer, my voice quiet but carrying to every ear. You told me I was nothing during my daughter's vows. You told me I did not belong. But look around you, Miller. Look at your guests. Look at your son. Look at your wife. Tell me now, which one of us looks like nothing? The hall went deathly silent. The Millers did not answer. They could not. Their power, their reputation, their carefully woven lies, all of it was unraveling in front of the very people they had tried to impress. Emily clung to me then, her sobs soft but fierce against my chest. Daniel stood beside her, silent tears streaking his face, his parents' downfall reflected in his shattered expression. The guests did not look at me with pity anymore. They looked at me with respect. But I was not finished. Not yet. I turned back to the crowd, my hand still resting on the papers spread across the lectern. This is the truth, and it cannot be erased. The room exploded with noise again. Angry voices, shocked gasps, restless movement as people began to rise, unsure of what would happen next. Some of the Millers' business partners stormed toward the exit, shaking their heads in disgust. Their empire was collapsing in real time. Mrs. Miller crumpled into a chair, her hands covering her face, her sobs muffled but raw. Mr. Miller's chest rose and fell violently, his eyes darting, searching, furious and lost. I looked at them one last time, then placed my hand on Emily's shoulder. My voice was calm, steady, final. This wedding is over, but my justice has only begun. The hall was chaos. Guests rose from their chairs in waves, the air filled with outraged whispers and hurried footsteps as some stormed toward the exits. The Millers' carefully chosen circle of friends and business partners no longer offered polite smiles or supportive nods. They looked at them with disgust, shaking their heads as they passed. A man in a suit muttered loudly as he left, "I trusted you with a contract." Not anymore. Another guest, a woman who had once clung to Mrs. Miller's every word, sneered as she walked past. "You built your whole life on lies." The Millers sat frozen, their empire dissolving around them. Mrs. Miller buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Mr. Miller sat stiffly beside her, his jaw locked, his eyes staring at nothing. His body was rigid, but I could see the truth in his trembling hands. He was broken, his mask shattered, his pride bleeding out in front of everyone. I did not linger on them. My focus was on my daughter. Emily clung to me, her face pressed against my chest, her tears soaking through my shirt. "Dad," she whispered between sobs. "I am so sorry. I never should have let them push you aside. I never should have believed." I pulled her close, stroking her hair like I had when she was a child. "No, sweetheart," I said softly. "This is not your fault. You loved him, and you wanted peace. You could not have known what they were hiding. But now you do." Daniel stood beside her, silent tears rolling down his face. He looked at me with an expression that was both grief and gratitude. "I never knew," he said hoarsely. "They told me the trust was safe. They told me everything was fine. I thought they were protecting me. But it was all lies." His hands clenched into fists. "I cannot forgive them." The priest closed his book and set it gently on the lectern. His face was solemn. "Marriage must be built on truth," he said. "Today, that truth has been revealed. Perhaps the ceremony ends here, but the truth has given you a choice. Choose wisely." The ceremony dissolved. Guests departed in clusters, their voices echoing with disbelief. Some stayed behind, their eyes on me, nodding in quiet respect. I was no longer the man erased from the program, the man pushed to the back row. I was the father who stood firm, who tore through lies with nothing but truth and resolve. That night, Emily and Daniel did not speak of vows or receptions. They sat with me at the small kitchen table where she had eaten breakfast as a child, where I had helped her with homework, where Karen had once smiled across steaming mugs of coffee. Emily held my hand tightly. Daniel sat across from us, pale but steady, and we spoke not of flowers or dresses, but of starting again. Weeks passed, and the news spread fast. The Millers' business contracts unraveled one by one. Their so-called friends abandoned them. The house they had refinanced twice slipped into foreclosure, their cars repossessed, their reputation shredded beyond repair. They tried to claw back dignity with excuses, but no one listened anymore. They had humiliated me in front of 100 people, and I had returned the truth in front of the same 100. Months later, Emily and Daniel were married again, but this time it was different. There were no marble halls or grand speeches, no programs stuffed with names meant to impress. It was in a small chapel on the edge of town, surrounded by people who truly mattered. My brothers were there, my cousins, Emily's childhood friends, the neighbors who had brought casseroles when Karen died. People who had never once asked me to prove my worth. I walked my daughter down the aisle that day with tears in my eyes, not from humiliation, but from pride. She smiled at me, her grip steady, her eyes clear. When I placed her hand in Daniel's, she whispered, "Thank you, Dad, for everything." When it came time for speeches, I finally stood and gave the words that had been stolen from me months before. I spoke of Emily's childhood, of Karen's memory, of the sacrifices that built this moment. I told them that love is not measured in money or status, but in the quiet persistence of showing up day after day, year after year. And as I looked into Emily's eyes, I saw Karen there, smiling, proud. The Millers were not present. They were not invited. They were whispers in the town now, names spoken with pity or contempt. They had wanted to erase me from my daughter's vows, but instead they erased themselves from everyone's respect. Later that evening, as the music played softly and Emily danced with Daniel under strings of lights, I stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The air was cool, the stars sharp against the dark sky. I thought of Karen, of the promise I had made her in that hospital room so many years ago. Never let anyone make you small, not in front of Emily, not ever. I smiled softly, my chest tight but steady. I had kept that promise. The Millers had tried to strip me of dignity, but in the end, it was their own pride that destroyed them. My justice had not been loud. It had not needed to be. It had been undeniable.